The modern psychiatric system is a fragmented and broken system. Muslims were the first to bring medicalized psychiatric treatment into their hospital systems. These were institutions of healing that were at the center of town. The fountains that were in these Maristans, every one of them is trademark because it was purposeful. You start with the Quran and the Sunnah, and then you build the psychology up.
How do we manage life's hardships, and does our way of living explain why so many of us are in therapy? Dr Rania Awaad is a clinical professor of psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine, where she is the director of Stanford Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Labs. I experienced a death recently, and then I spoke to a brother from Gaza who said 82 members of his family had passed away in the last 6 months or so. You know, how does one process that level of trauma?
They have this word called sumud, a kind of resilience of knowing and understanding why I was created. You look at the Prophet ﷺ, who experienced death and loss in his life. He says, the eyes will shed tears, the heart will feel sorrow. If you do not treat the soul, all you're really doing is symptom reduction.
We are here at the Kuala Lumpur Prophetic Strategy Summit, and I'm honored really to have our guest today, Dr Rania Awaad, psychiatrist, who's joining us today to discuss Islamic psychiatry and psychology. Dr Rania Awaad, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the Thinking Muslim.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm really interested in today's conversation. We've had a couple of conversations now about psychology and psychiatry on our podcast, and we've looked at the Islamic paradigm, the Maristan model. We've looked at some of the critiques of modern psychiatry and psychology. But I know you've really put together some extensive work. You've got a book, a number of books on the Maristan model, the Islamic psychology paradigm, some critiques of modern psychology and psychiatry. So I want to explore all of that today and try to understand really what Islam has to offer, or what Muslims can offer, what some would describe a modern world which is pretty ill, and a modern world that's suffering with an epidemic of mental illness. I don't know if that's an exaggeration or not. So let's really start with some very basic questions here.
Sure.
Is it possible to treat the psyche without treating the soul?
Wonderful. Bismillah. No, it is not possible from an Islamic psychology point of view. And the reason I say that is because if you look at what makes up the human psyche, the soul is a core component. Right. If you do not treat the soul, all you're really doing is symptom reduction. You're treating the surface level, maybe cognition, maybe behavior. That's really about it, which is so much of what modern psychology and psychiatry does today. But it doesn't really treat the person from the inside out. It doesn't really treat them fully. In an Islamic psychology discussion, we would say aligning them back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, back to their fitrah state. You cannot do so without treating the ruh, which is the soul.
Right. Okay. So let's try to unpack that and work out what those different terms mean. I mean, the psyche. What is the psyche according to the Islamic paradigm?
Yes. There are many people who've been writing recently about Islamic psychology and what is the human psyche, what are the components that make that up. My colleagues and I that have written some of this work together, we've largely taken this from the works of Imam al-Ghazali. He has a wonderful model of explaining the human psyche. Others have contributed as well. And in most of these models, particularly the Ghazalian model, the qalb, or the heart, but not the heart that beats in one's chest, but rather the metaphysical heart, is at the core of this model. And if you imagine bidirectional arrows connecting one thing to another, connected to that qalb, the metaphysical heart, is the ruh, the soul. Also the nafs, which some people have defined as the self, but really I prefer behavioral inclinations, the behavior. From there, you also have an attachment to the body, the jasad, an attachment to the ihsas, or the emotions, and the aql, which is the cognition. All of these are interconnected. So you think of an interconnected model, and all of which have to be looked at and treated when one is ill.
Okay, that's interesting. So there's an interplay between a number of metaphysical ideas here, or assets that the human being holds, So when someone like you, someone trained in understanding the human being and treating the human being comprehensively, you would be looking at the interplay between both. So it's like, let's just think about that in practice. Someone, I don't know, experiences a trauma, a death. Someone dies in their family, and they feel the pain of that trauma. How would Islamic psychology or psychiatry deal with that from utilizing those terms that you've just outlined?
Right. Yes. We understand a trauma to be something that is an event that then causes a person intense emotion, whatever it may be. In this example, you gave the example of death, which is hard for many people. Loss is hard. There's grief. And there are stages that happen with this grief. Yeah. We understand this in the modern psychology sense, but definitely also from an Islamic psychology paradigm.
Yeah.
What's different is that you would pull in the discussions really coming directly from the core sources that we take. We take everything that's empirical, meaning scientific evidence and research that we've done. Yeah. We take the rational discussions as well. Logically, what does this all mean? But what really differs here is the revelatory sciences, meaning for us, the Quran and the Sunnah.
Right.
You look at the Prophet ﷺ who experienced death and loss in his life and grief in his life. And you see that there is layers of healing that happen.
Right.
From the Islamic psychology paradigm, you would say, well, what he says as his young son, infant son Ibrahim is dying in his lap is powerful, and it kind of sets the stage of how we would treat something like this. In Islamic psychology, he says, the eyes will shed tears, the heart will feel sorrow. Both of these he normalizes. This is absolutely normative human behavior.
Crying is not bad.
Not at all. Not even for a man, and not even for a mu'min, a believer.
Yes.
But then he also says, but we do not say other than that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning we don't push on the qadar of what the fate Allah has given us. The combination of these three things are very important. You may cry, and this is an emotive experience that you then, from internally, emotionally, comes out. There's a psychosomatic expression, as we explain this to be. Yeah. There is a emotional expression in terms of the pain in the heart that's felt. Yeah. There is loss, there's grief. But we also, as believers, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has determined our lives, determined the life of the person who's passed now. And we make dua and pray for them, but we don't shame or suppress anyone's emotions that are grieving.
Right. So what's the role of the mind in that process? Because the latter part of that processing, of that healing, is sort of to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set a lifespan, and to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reunite you in Jannah, and to have the... So am I oversimplifying it when I think that the rational solution, or way that the rationality interacts with these emotional sides, is actually quite key to healing?
Not at all. I think it's important to understand that they are all, again, the model of interplaying. All of these different aspects are interplaying.
Right.
When we think about healing, this is important because I mentioned now grief. Yes? Different than trauma. Trauma is a more complex condition in which a person is often triggered by the very things that have happened. And incidents happen, but as time has gone on, they continue to be feeling the triggers that hurt them.
Yes.
Again and again. Grief is not this way. It lasts for a period of time. It eventually diminishes.
Yeah.
Different processes.
Right. Okay. So let's. Can I ask about trauma? Because of course everyone today seems to have a trauma, and again, maybe this is an oversimplification, but modern psychology tends to focus in on, I don't know, Freudian sort of ideas that we need to reset or recalibrate our present by looking back at those traumas. So a lot of our present lives and maybe the malfunction in our present lives owe a lot to historical traumas. Is that basic paradigm correct from an Islamic perspective?
If I may rephrase.
Please.
The modern field still is affected, if you will, the modern field of psychology is still affected by Freud, yes. But he's largely debunked at this point. Most modern psychologists really don't even consider his theories and concepts to be reality. It's been debunked over and over again. I would say, though, the first part of the discussion around trauma and people really holding on to this, somehow this is everything becoming a trauma in their life is also incorrect. It's not quite the way trauma works either. And this is very important that we do not belittle people that have actually gone through real trauma. And it continues to trigger them and affect them in their life. Often when people don't process their trauma, go through the steps of healing, and they push it under the surface, what ends up happening inadvertently is that as time goes on, out of the blue, it comes back up in the most unexpected times. And they feel that wave of as though they were reliving that very moment again. Right. And these are all signs of not being treated or healed. So if that's not happening to people that in their traumas, then it's probably not actually defined as a trauma, but maybe some difficulty they've gone through.
Right. So, so we're separating real traumas that people face, war, famine, abuse. These are real traumas that people face often in their early lives from maybe more superficial is the wrong word, but areas of life that are difficult and challenging. And you, in your field, you would want to separate these two out. Is that right?
Yes, it would be important to do so. Yeah. In fact, in the therapeutic processes, we do this very often.
Right.
What actually is a complex trauma that requires more than just talk therapy, and what is something that is that is a trauma, or somebody might think is a trauma, but is perhaps not as complex and may actually benefit from the work related to trauma in therapy. Right. It's very useful, and it could be something that we don't have to keep revisiting, whereas complex trauma often lingers for a good bit of time.
Right. So how does one treat complex trauma?
Usually it's a combination. The gold standard in the field is we say that there needs, and by the way, we'll come to this, I'm sure, but this matches actually what Islamic psychology says as well.
Brilliant.
And I say that because what I'll say next, people might think I'm just speaking as a psychiatrist, but actually matches the work of Islamic psychology in that there's usually a combination related to the talk therapies and medication.
Right.
And the reason for that is sometimes it is too overwhelming in order to even deal with therapy, to even have a conversation like this about the very thing a person is re-triggered, is reliving. They cannot actually calm those, the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems down without the help of medication. It's unfortunate, but it's also the reality of some people.
Right. So can we entertain the conversation about medication and the role of medication? Because, of course, there are some in our community that argue that medication should never be used, and we have enough within Quran and Sunnah to deal with any form of mental illness that we face. But at the same time, we do see studies and conversations in modern society, non-Muslims who talk about this quite readily, that we're over-medicalizing mental health. So where do you stand on sort of the use of medication?
Yes, I believe either extreme is problematic.
Right.
And the reason I say that is because it's not in line with our sunnah. If you look even directly to the Prophet, I'll start there, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's asked very directly around treatment when one is ill. This is a question that happens in his lifetime, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he responds very beautifully. A Bedouin came to him and said, Ya Rasulullah, shall I seek out treatments if I were to be ill?
Right.
And embedded in this question, you can imagine, because the Prophet is not a physician, why is this person asking him this question? Embedded in it, you might think, maybe he's asking to say, is it enough to just pray? Is it enough to just have iman? Is it enough to, will this away and be strong enough myself? But the Prophet ﷺ answers the question. He says, Na'am, yes. And then he talks to all of us. He says, Ya ibadallah, O servants of Allah, tadawu, seek out treatments. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not send down an illness unless he sends down a treatment. Or in some narrations, it reads a cure. That's powerful because it's a direct answer to a question we're all asking. Do I just pray this away? Shall I have enough iman? And you hear people say this every time in the Arab world. I turn on something and I hear somebody saying, "Al-mu'minu la yusabu bil-iktiab." I'll translate. A believer is not afflicted with depression. And I think to myself, how far are we from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and from scientific understandings? This is very short-sighted to think this way, and it's not in line with our tradition either.
Right. So you've talked about depression there. Yeah, because I hear this a lot. Imams sometimes say this, that if you're a believer, as you just said there, if you're a believer, then there's nothing to be depressed about. Even if you have the most acute form of trauma in your lives, there is a way to address that within an Islamic context. But depression is a real thing in your eyes, and something that Islamic psychology has treated in the past?
Absolutely.
Really?
The example I'll give here to make it for anybody who may be listening, watching, and think that this may be, whether they just think of themselves as a naysayer or not, I think if we just look at a scientific perspective of this, we understand depression and many mental illnesses are actually multifactorial, meaning there are multiple reasons and causes as to why they may happen. When you look at, and when you take it just from a spiritual perspective, you're pigeonholing just one aspect of why that depression, let's say, may have happened. Right. It could be a spiritual crisis, an existential crisis, perhaps. But it could also be biological, hormonal, genetic, environmental. Are we excluding, scientifically speaking now, as people who have studied science and understand the modern world in this way, are we excluding genetics? Are we excluding hormones? When a woman goes through postpartum depression, 1 in 5 women have this happen. It is not a fault of her own, nor is it that she's weak or doesn't have good iman, or she's feeling unworthy, that she is, how dare she be unworthy of this new blessing Allah has given her as a child, when the vast majority, scientifically speaking, of postpartum depression is actually hormonal. Right. It's a sharp and stark crash of the hormones, not in our hands. Yeah. When you look at it and we say to her, shame on you, you shouldn't be depressed, have iman, go pray. What are we saying to her when it's not a spiritual crisis and it's a hormonal issue that needs actual treatments? Right.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. So those treatments can often lead to therapy. And we know that in modern life, in Western societies and in Eastern societies, therapy is a very big thing. And people often spend their entire lives or a large part of their lives in therapy. Now, I want to understand just the idea of therapy and from your side, like, where does it fit in? From an Islamic paradigm, where does it fit in? And whether the idea of having therapy for life, whether that indicates that therapy is failing, or does that indicate, is that just the normality of modern life you just need?
No, this is an extreme as well.
Really?
Absolutely. We define therapy as a period of time in which a person receives assistance,
right? Tools,
techniques, to figure out how it is that they can help themselves through the issues that they're going through. We think about it as, for whatever reason, most people don't have all the tools they need in their toolbox. Okay. Maybe their parents didn't have those tools themselves to give them.
Right.
Maybe they went through war and experienced starvation, famine, something in which, again, the tools were not in the toolbox. It happened suddenly. Yeah. So you build tools and techniques, you add tools to this toolbox. And the best form of therapy, we say, it's successful when the person can then use those tools and techniques to become their own therapist. Yeah. They should not be in therapy for life unless another issue happens in life. Maybe they went through therapy because of some car accident that happened. They kept reliving that trauma, for example, and they needed therapy through that. They got through that issue. Later in life, they end up having a crisis in their marriage. So they need marriage therapy. Right. There's no issue in having multiple modalities of therapy over time, but it's not one therapist and one therapy for life. This is not the definition of therapy. This is exploitation of the system.
It's exploitation of the system.
Yes, from the therapist side and from the patient who is not learning the real tools to then help themselves.
Right. So we should all possess the tools to deal with our own mental health. And if we don't possess those tools, well, we can't naturally possess those tools. We will find others to help us to acquire those tools. Correct. So that we can deal with our lives. Okay, that's interesting. So Often I think about a society where everyone is identifying with their mental health, and we're pathologizing very basic sort of human challenges. Talk to that for me. I mean, there is this sort of idea that everyone seems to have a mental health crisis at the moment. And again, I used to teach young adults, and I would find that very much. I mean, especially over the last 15 years, the number of young adults who are now in treatment or in therapy has grown exponentially. I mean, explain that and the problem with that for me, please.
I'd like to separate those two things.
Yeah.
On one hand, we just went through a global pandemic. The rates of mental health issues have gone exponentially higher than they used to be. And there was definitely what I call the ripping off of the lid of something that had probably been festering for a very long time, especially in communities in which mental health had been stigmatized. The depression, anxiety, attention issues probably were all there to begin with, but it was not identified or permitted maybe to go and seek that help, or to even say, I have a condition such as, and name what it is.
Yeah.
On one hand, there's a relief from mental health providers, clinicians, to say, alhamdulillah, we finally have gotten to a point where people are able and willing to say, yes, I think I'm dealing with something more than just grief. It may be depression. Let me get that actual professional care and assistance, and not just talk to my friends and family who are not clinicians, right? On the other hand, you're right. There is a concern about everybody saying, I have this and I have this, and starting to make it part of their identity. Why would depression or anxiety be part of your identity? It's a condition you have in which we are then treating. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's problematic. You're seeing this happen with young people in all different kinds of things. Part of it is a phase that they may grow out of. And part of it too is a lack of really understanding the condition and what it means. A person isn't meant to have depression for the entirety of their life in every moment. They may have a chronic condition, but it's something that we hope to treat and bring them to a place of healing.
Right. Fantastic. Okay. Is there a problem with the way we live? Is capitalism harming our mental health?
For sure.
Really?
Absolutely.
How?
I believe that anything that's not in line with the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us and intended for us to live and gave us the guidelines in our Quran and Sunnah will absolutely cause a person to, their heart, their mind, their self to go haywire. Capitalism was not intended, to be a way of life as it is. The chasing of the dunya is exactly the opposite of how we are actually meant to live our lives.
So how are we meant to live our lives? Like, paint a picture of, I don't know, a Muslim who lives in New York. I was in New York recently, and it's a feverish city. There's a lot going on, and it's sort of the hub of capitalism. So a Muslim lives in that city and sort of acquires these traits of chasing the dunya. How does one release themselves from the rat race and have a balanced life such that their mental health remains in equilibrium? Yes,
it's true. Or you can do what my parents did, who instead of raising us in New York, they both worked in New York, raised us across the way in New Jersey, so that we had a little bit of relief from the rat race.
Greenery.
Yes, absolutely. Backyards, yes. Mashallah. But I have to also say, for somebody who's actually listening to this in New York or I'm from San Francisco, when you're in a major city, it's you absolutely can take pause. You absolutely can decide to live your life in a way that's not part of the rat race. You may still be going up the ladder in your career, figuring out your education, gaining and earning material things. None of these things are against the rules of Islam or the way of living our life according to the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended. However, we say this because it's not about what's in your hand, but rather what's in your heart. And if the dunya, literally, and the race of it all is in the heart, then we see people actually are, it's maladaptive to the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant for us to live this life.
Right. Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. So acquiring wealth in itself isn't a problem.
Isn't a problem.
It's how you balance out your life with other things, with salah, with community.
And what you do with this wealth.
Right.
Where do you put it? How do you invest it? Is it endowed in some way that can then be your sadaqah jariyah, your ongoing a legacy in charity after you've left this dunya.
Is giving charity good for your mental health?
Absolutely.
Really?
Because on so many levels, on a spiritual level, it's literally, we know it to be the erasing of sins, the expiation of sins.
Yeah.
The people of old would say, what would I have done with my sins had I not been able to find someone to give my charity to?
Really?
Of course, it's a lifting. And when you lift that on a spiritual level, all the burdens spiritually, you elevate yourself also.
Yeah.
Emotionally and mentally.
Can I ask you about the people of Gaza? It's traumatic what we see. I mean, we feel the trauma, but of course these Palestinians are feeling trauma every day, and there is I presume there is this idea of collective trauma. There is sort of, I experienced a death recently, and then I spoke to a brother from Gaza who said 82 members of his family had passed away in the last 6 months or so. How does one process that level of trauma?
Us or them?
Sorry?
Us?
Oh, yes.
Or the Gazans?
Both.
Yeah. We have so much to learn from the Gazans.
Yeah.
I've learned so much in these last few years.
Yeah.
Because every time you feel like I cannot take this anymore, this is too much, this is too overwhelming, and it is. It's horrific. Beyond even words can explain.
Yes.
You see a Gazan or speak to one, and they have this, yes, it's immense pain for them too. Of course, they're only human as we are. But there's something they have this word called sumud, a kind of resilience of knowing and understanding why I was created.
Yeah.
I'm here for a purpose. I know where I'm going. And so I don't fear death, as many of them will tell you. But this purpose that I'm here for allows me to continue pushing forward even after I've been pulled out of the rubble. As I've met psychologists recently, pulled out of the rubble twice. All members of the family have died.
Wow.
And she was crying, not because everyone died, but because she wondered what she didn't do to be given martyrdom as well. What is this mindset?
Yeah.
I can't recreate this mindset.
Yes.
It's something incredibly powerful, and we have so much to learn from.
So that brings me to the idea of resilience. I mean, we all want to be resilient. And actually, there's two parts to this question. Are some people hardwired to be less resilient than others? And how do we develop resilience in ourselves?
We take step by step.
Right.
Sometimes we're so, we take leaps and then we crash and we fail. Resilience is something in which you wake up every day and you push yourself a little bit further.
Right.
It also requires a certain level of mentorship, a certain amount of helping you with the checks and balances system. For so many people, that doesn't even exist.
Really?
The idea of mentorship, spiritual mentorship, the idea of even, I would say, a coach, somebody who's able to, you think of an athlete, a world star athlete,
Right.
Olympian. And I always say this, every Olympian we know, every gold medalist we know has a coach.
Yeah.
Even if that coach themselves doesn't hold a gold medal, but they have a coach, because why else would they get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to train and continue training 4 years for a 10-second race? It's the same thing spiritually, but many of us don't quite understand it that way.
Yeah. So we need mentors. We need people. How important is it for a Muslim for this mentor to be a Muslim? And this generally in the sort of therapy field, how important is it for therapists to share your religious beliefs?
Very important. Really? I was once part of a clinic that focuses on Muslim mental health specifically. Yeah. And on intake, they would ask everybody few questions, 4 questions in particular. But one of them was this question exactly. What's the likelihood that you would have come to therapy, right, mental health care, had your therapist not been Muslim? The answer was between somewhat agree and fully agree. It was over 90%, which is powerful, which means that you have all of these Muslims that have come forward. They actually are patients in that clinic. They would not have come forward had there not been that same background and understanding.
Right. Okay. So let's move on to because it just seems to me, after looking at reading some of your papers and you've written most recently a book about the Maristan idea. It seems to me that you're not just proposing that Islamic psychology is an add-on to what we have already.
Not at all.
You're calling for a comprehensive relook. You're looking under the hood. You're looking at, rewiring how psychologists and psychiatrists look at human beings. Like, explain that to me. There is a model, a system you're trying to develop here. Explain the sort of the extent to which you and other psychologists aspire to change and rewire this system.
Absolutely. Many people have tried to explain or define Islamic psychology in different ways. And if they said it could be this and could be this, I don't agree. I actually believe that there is a clear paradigm in which we build Islamic psychology from the bottom up. You start with the Quran and the Sunnah, and then you build the psychology up.
Right.
As opposed to what we call the top-down approach, which is you take whatever's already in the field of psychology and you Islamicize it.
Right.
You add and sprinkle a little Quran here, a little hadith here. You make it Arabize the words a little bit.
Yes, yeah.
Not useful.
Right.
Maybe there's some use for some people, but this is not actually the way I define, and many of my colleagues define Islamic psychology, which is a much more complicated situation here, where you're literally building a new science. It's actually not fully new. It's a revival of a science we've had traditionally, but it's been in the dust of time, lost in the dust of time at this point. And so many of us are doing a revival at this point and building or rebuilding from the bottom up an entire field of Islamic psychology. It looks very different, actually, from modern Western psychology. There are some elements that are recognizable, again, cognition, behavior. But when you think about the whole point of this is to realign you back to your fitrah, that primordial essence that Allah has created you in. And also realign you back to what is your purpose here in this world, in this dunya. And we all know from the verse in the Quran that it's none other than to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not merely on the prayer rug, but worship in all of the facets of our life. So that our dunya is meant to actually have a purpose in this way, and it leads to an akhirah that is Jannah. That is Islamic psychology.
Really?
If it's not doing that, I don't define it as Islamic psychology.
Wow, okay. So then does that mean that Islamic psychology is exclusively just for Muslims?
Absolutely not.
Right.
Islamic psychology is for all. Here's why. The essence, as we talked about the model of the human psyche, is the soul, the self, the heart, the mind, and the emotions. All humans possess this. If I'm speaking to you and hoping to realign you to your fitrah, your primordial essence, your soul, as long as you have a soul, Islamic psychology works. I may not use the same Arabic terminology or terminology that sounds foreign to someone, but the essence of it is recognizable to all human beings. So those of us who have been in the field for some time will tell you, and I have both Muslim and non-Muslim patients at Stanford University, yes, I do Islamic psychology with everyone because it's the core principles.
Right. Your most recent book looks at the Maristan model, this historical model of treating the mentally ill. Just give us a picture of the contours of this system, please.
This is something I'm very excited about, mashallah. Let me back up a few steps and explain how we got here. My work initially had been looking at, to be very honest, in my personal story here that I've shared, on some discussions before, is that I was very suspicious of this field. I had no intention to come into psychiatry, very much an accidental psychiatrist, if you will. Very last minute came into the field. And because of that suspicion, I spent a lot of time actually looking at the origins and understanding what the early Muslim predecessors and scholars had written about this topic. I was trained in Sharia originally, had the ability to read the early texts, went back to the early texts. A lot of my early publications are actually on figures such as Abu Zayd al-Balkhi, al-Razi, others, really giving them credit back that had been taken away from them or had been misappropriated, and actually saying, no, these are actually the pioneers of the field that's usually written from a Eurocentric lens that leaves out the Muslims and looks at things from a very behavioralist point of view. In the process of doing so, then discovered these great individuals, Balkhi, Razi, and others, did not work in silos. They worked in institutions of healing. The early Muslims didn't call their hospitals. They called them Bimaristan, where in Farsi, which is the original word here, is the place where one goes when they're ill. In Arabic, Darush Shifa, which is the center or house or abode of healing centers.
Yeah.
I was really inspired by this concept and felt, as I looked around me to everybody around me, nobody seemed to know anything about this. I would say, did you know about this?
Yeah.
Did you know that the early Muslims were the first, not the first to create hospitals, because all civilizations had some form of hospital, but they were the first to bring medicalized psychiatric mental health care into their hospital systems, side by side with all the other types of medical treatment: surgery, obstetrics, pediatrics, ophthalmology, psychiatry. This doesn't happen to our research and our knowledge and the work we've done in, writing this book. It doesn't happen before the Muslims.
Right.
So then the question became, why?
Yeah.
Why were the Muslims? Why were they the first to do this? And it goes back to it. If you look at the writings of the early greats, it goes back to the very hadith that I had quoted before. Allah doesn't send down an illness unless he sends down a treatment. They keep quoting this, which meant they were compelled that if they saw conditions, whether they be physical or mental health, and they did not discriminate between them, if they saw such conditions in the society around them, they were compelled to find treatments for them.
Yeah.
And they brought them into their healing centers. This is what inspired me in this way, to say, this must be revived. We must bring this back. The modern psychiatric system is a fragmented and broken system.
Right.
I say this as a practicing psychiatrist. And it requires being able to bring back all aspects of healing once again: mind, body, soul,
Right.
inside to out, outside to in. How will you do so unless you have healing centers that are focused on all aspects of your healing? Truly.
Yeah. So if I lived in medieval Islamic society where I had to enter for treatment, for healing, one of his Bimaristans, what would I experience?
In a traditional Islamic society, first of all, you would find them in the center of town.
Right.
This has its own beautiful reasoning as well. For example, in Damascus, the very door of the old city of Damascus is the door of the Bimaristan. And the reason for this is, in Old City, and if you think about getting from point A to point B, you must cross the center of town. The sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is that you visit the sick, you visit the ill. They must be accessible for you to fulfill the sunnah.
Yeah.
It's a communal sunnah. And so when you think about it, these are not institutions that are asylums, the way we understood them to be in Europe or even now in modern sense at all. These were institutions of healing that were at the center of town, and they were beautiful. Islamic architecture is incredible, not just because of its beauty and its geometric balance and things, but there is a spiritual significance to everything that was designed architecturally.
Yeah.
One of our mentors, and who actually wrote in the book here, Dr. Mustafa al-Badawi, has an excellent book on the spiritual significance of Islamic architecture. Every arch, every dome, every color that was used had a spiritual significance for healing. This is a lost science that is almost never spoken about today. I'm not interested in a regular building with 4 walls and a pretty coloring to it. No, it itself has to have a spiritual element of healing. You walk in, the trademark are the fountains. Every one of the Maristans had, and I use the word Maristan because it's a Latinized shortened word of Bimaristan, used in the Latin sense, so that's how we say it in English. And the fountains that were in these Maristans, every one of them, this trademark, because it was purposeful. It was beautiful, but the sound of water is healing. The use of hydrotherapy, water therapy, is part of the treatment. The greenery that's there, meaning the natural elements that are in the space too, is very important. I trained at one of the world's premier hospitals, Stanford Hospital. Yet you walk into Stanford Hospital or any hospital, it's jarring. White walls, bright lights, beeping sounds, right? Even as the physician in the space, I'm anxious, right? Let alone the patient. These institutions incorporated beauty, sound, color, smell, aromatherapy, the idea of the science of the color, the sounds of the sounds that were brought in, nature sounds, Quran, adhan, but also the maqamat, which we have several papers on this topic, of, giving Muslims back the credit of what now you would call music therapy. I know people have an issue with this. Let's call it sound therapy.
Yes.
But what they did is they took the science of the Greeks and they repurposed it. They got rid of the elements of entertainment that were not useful, but they used the science of the maqamat, the tones. And they developed, and this is Farabi's work, where he took the tones and he said, these tones, when played, will calm down an anxious person. But when you play these tones, they elevate the depressed person. So they literally, in addition to having physicians, nurses, they also had musicians that would come in specifically to play certain tones for certain mental health conditions. Diet and food was a major part of this healing process, because what you eat either makes you ill or heals you. And that was a major focus on customizing the meals for each and every patient depending on their condition, right? And then you have the elements of therapy, talk therapy. People are amazed when I say this. The Muslims absolutely, maybe they didn't invent talk therapy, but they absolutely utilize, push forward, and contributed to the concepts of talk therapy.
Right.
I write a lot about Balkhi because I really like this particular individual, and my early papers are about him. And he really pushed forward the concept of talk therapy for different conditions. My papers on obsession, OCD, on phobias, for example, outline a form of cognitive behavioral therapy that we use today called exposure therapy, that he, in the 9th century, completely outlined and explained how you do this.
Really?
They used talk therapies as well. It was a model of healing that was truly fully holistic. All of your senses, spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, and you were healed from the inside out. And you were not let to be discharged from this space until you were fully well. And the funny part of the story is, and also until you can eat a full chicken.
Until you can eat a full chicken?
Yes.
Really?
Which I thought was quite
Because?
humorous. It meant that you were now physically healthy well enough to do so.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. It's a trigger warning for vegetarians there, sorry.
Yes, I suppose. We will accommodate them too, inshallah.
We'll accommodate them too. And okay, that's really fascinating. So how then can we recreate this in modern society, modern cities? I mean, does a Maristan model work in New York or London?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to do exactly this thing, inshallah.
Really?
This is my dream, my dua, inshallah, ya Rab.
Really?
That before Allah takes me off this earth, that I'm able to begin the revival process. The book here is the blueprint of how exactly to do exactly what you said.
Wow.
It's the historical model for modern implementation, is the title, for this very purpose.
Yeah.
Look, everywhere Islam went, the Maristans went with it. We know this because everywhere, if you look across the Muslim ummah, you see that there's masajid everywhere. The institution of the masjid travels with Islam wherever it goes, yes?
Yeah.
And when you enter a masjid as a Muslim, you know what to do. You know the qibla, you know the direction, you know what to do for prayer, you know where to make wudu. It's understood what this is functionally for. Everywhere Islam went, the madaris went with it. Because this is a religion of education. Iqra as the first word of revelation. Yes, read.
Yeah.
And so that's prevalent across the Muslim world. It turns out in our research that everywhere Islam went, the Maristans went with it as well.
Really?
You have Maristans from, west to east, all the way through. Whether we're talking about Muslim Spain, whether we're in Morocco, whether we're talking about in the Gulf world, in Damascus being the very first of them, Baghdad had amazing, Cairo, Maristans, Uzbekistan had an amazing, beautiful Maristan.
Yeah.
And if you look all throughout, everywhere Islam went, the Maristan went with them. In South Asia as well, India, we have a couple papers on this as well.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. So what would be the distinction between Cairo and London? Right? Between Baghdad in its original state and New York. Of course we can have a Maristan in these spaces and places. However, when I talk about the spiritual significance of architecture, it must also match the location in which you're in. It cannot stick out like a sore thumb. It has to match the very geography that you're in so that it is actually healing and calming to the person. You don't want something that looks like it came out of New Delhi in the middle of New York.
Right.
Yes. So it will look very New York-like, if you will.
Yeah.
But it will have the elements of healing even within it.
Yeah. So you're actually planning to make a Maristan, to build a Maristan.
This is my hopes and dream, inshallah, with the right partners and funding. And we call upon the investors and those interested in putting their awqaf, their endowments into this project. This is how they were funded.
How far has the project gone?
At this point, blueprint. Really? So the research that we did was about 3 years of traveling across the Muslim world, looking at all these different institutions, the Maristans that are still standing. The majority of them are in Istanbul at the moment, or I should say in Turkey at the moment. I spent a sabbatical, traveling from one end of the country to the other, visiting all the institutions that are still standing, Cairo and others. As a child, as a young person, I'd also gone to the one in Damascus, although I hope, inshallah, to be able to visit again soon, inshallah ta'ala. And there are commonalities in all of them. There are unique distinctions in all of them. And in processing all of this information, we've also now done a rendition, kind of a blueprint architecturally, what this might look like in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Really?
We've been working with a student of mine who has the buy-in of the Stanford Dean of Engineering, the Deans of Architecture and Sustainability. It's been phenomenal. We've talked to several architects in this sense. And now it really comes down to the business model itself. We formed a nonprofit organization, a 501c3 in the United States called Maristan, with the hope and the purpose to actually bring this to life. The last few years, we've been working on education, elevating the global consciousness around this very topic and concept. The next few years, we hope, is actual implementation, building and creating, and then the programming that happens within it, inshallah ta'ala.
And is it your wish that these Maristans also are developed in the Muslim world? So you'd have a recreation of our traditional methods of healing in Istanbul, in Damascus, in,
absolutely,
Muslim cities.
Absolutely.
Really.
But I'll tell you something, because people have asked me, we're in Kuala Lumpur today, and people have said, what about Malaysia? I was just in Indonesia, I was just in Bosnia, right? Had all these trips in the Muslim majority lands. And I keep receiving this question, and I say, yes, inshallah, and inshallah in time. However, what I've learned in my journey and process, unfortunately, fortunately, however you wish to term it, the East continues to look at the West. There is something about having this first done in the West. I was just in Istanbul. I delivered the first lecture on Islamic psychology in one of the universities they've ever allowed.
Really?
They've never had a discussion about this. They said, you're the first to talk about Islam and psychology. I said, how in this country when so much emerged from here? And they said, that's how it is. And I said, you have my lab at Stanford, the Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab. When they heard that, they said, we should have this in Turkey too. I said, you're the origin, right? SubhanAllah. It's something about, unfortunately, and I say this, our lands and our bodies are no longer colonized, but our minds still are. And there's something about starting this first in the West, making sure it works. I need to be able to supervise it directly. California is an excellent place for this. They're very into all things holistic and new age, SubhanAllah. But once we're able to do this once well and know that it works, then comes the scaling.
Right.
And spreading across the world, we hope, inshallah, revitalizing what a psychiatric, holistic healing center and system might look like.
Dr. Rania, you look quite unassuming in many ways, but you're pretty radical, it seems. There is a subversiveness to your aspirations. I mean, is that how you see yourself?
I see myself as an accidental psychiatrist.
So I want to wrap up this conversation because I think it's fascinating, and you've got colleagues from mainstream psychology. You will be interacting with non-Muslims all the time at Stanford. I mean, how are they interacting with this Maristan idea, with the broader principles and paradigm of Islamic psychology?
Those what we've shared this with, such as some of the different disciplines across the university that I was mentioning, they're very interested in this.
Really?
And I think it's because I think if you take a pulse on modern psychiatry today, there is a brokenness to the system, and anybody who is honest enough will admit this. And interestingly enough, the field itself, when I first was training and entered the field, there was no discussion on religion, definitely not. Spirituality was far, maybe culture. now I'm finding the field really shifting the other way of wellness, well-being. What does it mean to bring all your identities to the table and really help you heal fully? And modern medicine is coming, precision medicine, and really thinking about individualized care. There are so many things that are happening in the field now. And an incorporation of what they used to call alternative forms of healing that are now becoming the mainstream of the field. The time is ripe for this, subhanAllah.
Really? That's fabulous. I feel that there is still a problem, or certainly I would imagine you see this within the Muslim community. Because, of course, when we do have Muslims who face these traumas and mental illness, they would normally go to their Imams in the mosques. And within the Muslim community, there is a stigma that is attached to mental health. And of course, probably, and maybe this is unfair, but I would suggest that our Imams are very much ill-equipped to deal with these mental health crises and problems. Is there in your outreach, is there work that you do with Muslim communities in America and beyond?
Oh, 100%.
Really? What are you telling them?
And before I say this, I speak this, what I will say now, as somebody who is also an ustada. Yes, I teach the religious sciences. Right. Yeah, the sacred sciences is my initial training. I am married to a sheikh. The reason I say all of these things is because I'm not here to attack the shuyukh or the imams or to belittle their work and how much load is on them.
Yeah.
Every single research study we have done in my lab, for all the years, and we've repeated the study multiple times, where we ask, who are you most likely to go to if you or your loved one believes they have a mental health condition? And we list out the various types of people they may go to. The imams, at least in the United States, the imams are always at the top, right after friends and family.
Yeah.
The psychologists, psychiatrists are still towards the bottom of the list. It's shifting. There's something generationally shifting here with the younger generation, but still this is the case. So I was mentioning how the nonprofit organization, after doing my lab, having this lab, maybe 7 years into my lab, after publishing in mainstream and high-level medical journals and really getting the word out there and, all the Nature, JAMA, Lancet, all these big journals, decided, well, how am I getting this information to the Muslim community, my own communities, right? At this point, we formed the nonprofit organization Maristan and really focused on education, psychoeducation in the beginning, training of our frontline Muslim community leaders, which the majority of whom are imams, but also your Sunday school teachers, your youth directors, your people who engage with and are seen as leaders in their communities. So Maristan offers multiple trainings, some of them very difficult trainings, such as the one on suicide, for example. And it trains from, and this all comes from the lab, all this research comes from the lab and is translated over in the community-facing organization Maristan. And it brings the Sharia sciences, so all the rules of Islam, and marries it with the scientific understandings of psychology and psychiatry. This combination you rarely find. It's actually quite unique work, but it's powerful work because it's really reshaped how people see and understand mental health, including the imams themselves, who, by the way, very often are very clear that they are out of their depths. Right? They're like, I don't know why everyone comes to me for their teenager who's, doing something wrong, and the person who's dealing with addiction and the marriage that's falling apart, and I'm not trained in any of these things, right? And so we're here to assist and help and train them to fill some of these gaps.
I said earlier on that I taught young adults, and in particular, I felt that over the last 10 years, young women in particular have faced enormous challenges in their personal lives, and mental health is always an issue of concern to very many of them. Can you talk to that? Like, what's causing this? Some analysts have called it an epidemic of mental illness amongst young women. What's causing these fault lines within those minds?
May I say young women and young men?
And young men, yeah. Yes. Maybe the young men exhibits in different ways, I would imagine. I mean, suicide rates are probably higher amongst young men than women.
This is true, in terms of suicide specifically.
Yeah.
But I would like to say that because it's young people. And yes, they may exhibit in different ways, but the very aspects of when you see that are at the core are affecting both. You mentioned capitalism earlier. I also think about what is it causing somebody to be skewed and far away from the core and alignment of what their purpose here in the dunya is.
Yeah.
This is affecting both. One might think, look at, I think of social media, beauty standards. What does it mean? And it's very fickle. Yes. Fads come and go, and people chase after this, and then it shifts very quickly the next day and next week, right? And it comes. And so when you think about how do you help somebody who's looking at all of these external factors as their role models, as their goals in life, and in reality, they're not really grounded in this way. This is true of both the women and the men.
Yeah.
All young people.
Really.
Muslim and not Muslim, both. There's a certain grounding I think we need to redo for people to really help them, anchor them in a way that they are not just going with the fad and the flow as it comes.
Is there a problem with looking out for the latest health fad, the latest mental health solution? I've come across people who every month they've got a new thing that they've latched onto to save them from a crisis or a challenge in their lives. I mean, is that type of mentality problematic?
It may very well be.
Yeah.
I think about what is it that's really at the root of all of this.
Really?
If there is a crisis that a person is just sort of coping with, they may be coping in an unhealthy fashion and maybe latching onto these various fads and health, things that are not really treating the core root and issue is problematic. Right. Because if you do go to the very root of the issue, maybe we solve what that is. And maybe it takes time, months even, of real deep treatment. There's a certain humility to say something is wrong and I need help beyond myself and beyond the quick fix.
Dr. Rania Awaad, you've been very generous with your time. You've got a book in front of you there. This is your new book on Maristan.
Yes.
Would you like to say a few words about what you hope to achieve from the book and what it contains in terms of knowledge?
Sure. Yeah. This was written because we felt that most people had no idea what the Maristans were, Muslim and not Muslim alike. The field of psychology had largely lost touch completely with these concepts. Yeah. And I would say maybe not even lost touch, but sometimes, and we write about this, whether inadvertently or purposefully leaving out the Muslims from the discussion. So many of the papers that I've sent out and published in the world, when the reviewers, because they're double-blinded, peer review, they don't know who I am or what my institution is when they're reviewing for scientific content. They've written back amazed.
Really?
And I know it's double-blinded because they usually call me a he instead of a she. Yeah. It's the bias of academic medicine.
Yes.
But they'll say things like, his work shows, subhanAllah, really overturns the discussion on psychology. Yeah. What we're doing here is we're rewriting the narrative. Yeah. We are rewriting the narrative, as in to say, what was the role of the early Muslims in the field of what we today call psychology? What were their contributions? The idea of bringing and finding that the Muslims were the first to bring medicalized psychiatric treatment into their hospital systems is phenomenal. The entire field needs to know this. Every Psych 101 or Psych 1, initial introduction of psychology class at every university needs to rewrite their curriculum and reteach it in order to then be able to say, well, why? Why would the Muslims were the ones to do such a thing? Yeah. And for them, when you realize that there is such a holistic level of understanding the human psyche, all of its aspects and treating it, this is our goal. It was a blueprint. It is a blueprint to explain how the Muslims then institutionalize, put it into a center of healing. How do they take it from theory to practice? So several of the chapters here are explaining just that. Treatments, architecture, concepts. And then there is a chapter that I feel is very important, which is about financial sustainability. Right. How do you sustain these institutions? Because what I found amazing as I traveled is they'd be around for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. How do you keep an institution running for hundreds of years? Yeah. It's the awqaf, or the endowments, the ruler, the wealthy families, individuals that wanted this, and it's actually written into sometimes the very wall of the institution says, right, I am building this institution so that I am buying my ticket to Jannah, quite literally. Yeah. It's powerful. And it's part of our heritage and tradition. We shouldn't run away from the discussion of mental health and psychiatry. In fact, if anything, we should embrace it and understand the Muslims were, in fact, some of the best early pioneers of this field. And they understood it in a way that's different than modern psychology, much more holistic, and can actually truly help not just the Muslim, but all of humanity truly in healing. So this is our blueprint. We hope, inshallah, to bring it to life as we discussed, inshallah, soon with the proper partners and funding and assistance, inshallah.
And so you're actively looking out for partners.
Absolutely.
Right. So if people come our way, we should refer them to yourself. You know, there may be Muslims who want to buy their ticket to Jannah.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Or and perhaps there's skill sets.
Right.
We need so many skill sets to put an institution of holistic healing like this in place.
Skill sets such as
architecture, business design, interior design.
Yeah.
The actual healing programs that should be within this space. So the psychologists and psychiatrists and others, clinicians and healers. You know, I'm looking at color, sound, the type of greenery that should be in there. There's so many different types of disciplines that need to come together to really bring this to life, inshallah ta'ala.
Dr. Rania Awaad, I'm really honored to have you with us today. And I think there's a little healing in the blue of our Thinking Muslim logo and set, I would like to say. But Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. It's really been a fascinating conversation. Jazakallah
Thank
khair.
you. Jazana wa iyyakum. Allah bless you and accept from all of us. Ameen.
Ameen. Jazakallah khair. Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.